Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Today is Tuesday, February 11th, and this is the Finance Committee. I will call this meeting to order. And now is the time for public comments. Do we have anyone here in the audience that would like to speak to the committee? Nope, seeing none, I will close public comment and move on to regular business. The first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the January 27th regular meeting. Can I get a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2 is the 2024-2025 water rate study update with a presentation by Allison Lekowitz from Lekowitz and Sign Municipal Consultants.
Yeah. Good evening, Chairman Smith and Finance Committee members. City staff is here today with Allison Lekowitz with L&T Consultants. We've been working with her over the last couple of months to prepare our water rate study. We've worked and looked at a couple different things that we're going to update with you guys today. One, a detailed cost service analysis, a determination of current and future revenue needed to provide water services, an assessment of existing customer service fee structures, options for changes to the rate structure such as meter fees, conservation fees, bulk water usage, etc., and requirements to comply with the Prop 218 study. We also have a tentative schedule to be able to work to be able to get these included effective July 1st in our August 1st bill if we decide to move forward and pending the Prop 218 process. So the consultant has come up with 3 different rates. The city staff believes that one of the options is a little bit better than the other 2. One, it actually does not include any additional debt and also provides for a bigger fund balance. The consultant is available and will be available for questions at the end. So what we're looking for today is we are looking for a direction to see if we're on the right path or if we need to make any adjustments to the rates. Depending on the feedback that we get today, we can either present it at council at the next meeting, or if changes are needed, then we can reschedule and come back for our regularly scheduled Finance Committee meeting at the end of this month in February with presenting. That means we would present to council initially either the first or second week in March. So with that, I'll pass it over to Allison to go ahead and do tonight's presentation.
Great. I just want to do a quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So either I can share my screen or we can use the presentation up on the screen here, and I'll just say like advanced slide if that's easier.
Either way, you can share your screen if you want, or I can easiest for you.
Oh, sure. It looks like screen sharing has been disabled. Do you mind enabling that?
Do the slides then. No, that's okay. Just go ahead and present, and I'll change.
All right. Fine. Next slide, please. Okay. So your water rates have not been increased in a few years now, and that's one of the overall arching principles we should remember. We are proposing some increases, but I advise everyone to remember that rates have not been adjusted in a few years, so we are playing a little bit of catch up in terms of just like the cost of services, materials, and supplies to run your water system. So your current rate structure is a base fee of $32.25 per month, and it includes the first 11,000 gallons of water consumption. And then any usage above that is charged a tiered rate structure. So at higher levels of use, the cost per 1,000 gallons goes up. And your base fee currently applies to all customer types. So even larger commercial customers with much larger service connections, larger meter sizes, also currently pay at $32.25. And as a reminder, the water fund is a utility fund. self-supported by rates and charges, which it is at your city. Some other cities I work with, I see that their utilities are not doing so well financially and are drawing from the general fund or other funds. We do not want that to ever be the case. We want your water utility to be self-supported by its rates and charges. And so that's the overall goal of the rate study, to make sure the water rates are covering operations, capital improvements, paying off debt, and maintaining a healthy emergency fund balance. Great. And under the Proposition 218 process, which is the kind of legal governing statute for utility rates, we can adopt a 5-year plan in one public outreach process, and this is the same process we use for the solid waste rate study. So City Council can adopt a 5-year plan, and the plan really represents the maximum rates each year. So it's kind of like a worst scenario rate plan, and you have the authority each year to review the rates, and costs were not quite as high as what we expected, if you got a lot of growth in your community, or you sold a lot more water than I projected, and the rates don't need to go as high as what we included in this plan, you always have the authority to lower the rates without having to do another Proposition 218 outreach process. But as part of this study, we are demonstrating that the costs are reasonable, that the rates are proportional and fair to customers. On the procedural side, we've conducted the rate study. So the rate study will be your documentation that you've analyzed your cost of service. You have to mail a notice of the proposed rate increase to property owners and raters, and then hold a public hearing a minimum of 45 days later. I think we have a few more bullet points on this slide. And if more than 50% of your ratepayers protest, you cannot adopt the rates. Otherwise, City Council at its option can adopt the rate plan. So since we did the solid waste rate study a few years ago, there has been a new Proposition 218 law that went into effect just January 1st. It's called the Exhaustion of Administrative Remedies. It basically gives the city a little extra protection. In the Prop 218 notice, we offer customers the ability to write a written objection. It's pretty technical. They have to cite specific legal statutes and make some kind of case that the proposed rates are illegal. And if they do not write a written objection, then it makes it much more difficult for any customers to challenge the city at a later time. So we're definitely recommending the written objection process. It goes along with the 218. It would be included in your Proposition 218 mailer for all your customers. And the bonus also is that if any written objections do come up, you have the opportunity to address them, at the public hearing instead of later during the lawsuit. All right, next slide, please. So the current financial standing of the water utility is on this slide. So your current rates and miscellaneous revenues are collecting about $2.5 million. And then I compared that to existing operating costs. So these are budgeted costs for this year. You have operations, utilities is the electric cost to pump your water. You have SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act compliance costs, and existing debt service. So all of that totals about $2.7 million. So we are looking at slight deficit. I think we have, thank you, slight deficit of about $200,000. So key goal of this rate study will be to make sure that the rates are adequate to cover operating costs, existing debt service, and then on the next slide I have capital costs. So we are also proposing to fund capital improvements to your water system. These improvements are needed to ensure the safe, reliable service for your customers. Every time I do a water rate study, I always ask Public Works and the engineers, are these projects really needed? Can anything be delayed or shuffled around? We're always concerned about affordability for customers, and we did conduct that process with your city staff. And so we fine-tuned the capital improvement list to really focus on projects that are absolutely necessary to continue to provide good quality service for your customers. So over the 5-year period, we're looking at about $3.9 million of capital improvement funding. And I wanted to emphasize that sometimes public agencies come to me and say, well, can't we just debt finance projects, all these projects or some of these projects? And I did include a debt financing option, but I will say that debt financing really works best when there's one particular project that is very costly and would cause a spike in the rates in one particular year, and then issuing debt smooths out that cost. Instead of one spike year of funding, you pay an annual debt service cost, right? In your case, these projects are really annual projects. Most of them are larger, ongoing maintenance projects, and so there's really not as much benefit of potentially issuing new debt. We're not smoothing out one particular year of very expensive capital projects. So we did include a debt option just to show another potential option, but that isn't the recommended option here. Okay, thank you. So we ran a few scenarios to give the Finance Committee and City Council some options. So we have option 1 is no new debt. Option 2 is a more phased-in option with no new debt. And then option 3 would be a debt financing of $2 million. The next column over where it says annual revenue increase, that's the revenue increase year over year compounded for each year of the 5-year plan. So like an example would be option 1, the first year revenue increase is 15%, compounded onto that, the next year would be 30%, then 20%, and then 4 and 4. And the 4 and 4 represent basically an inflationary increase those last 2 years of the rate plan. The next column over is the cumulative increase. So when we compound year over year over year, the proposed revenue increases, that's the combined effect over all 5 years. And so you can see that even though the options have a little bit of phasing in, they all have slightly different percent increases each year. They all end up about the same, where it's roughly a doubling of revenues over the 5-year period. And again, it just happens kind of at different rates, where some of the options are increasing revenue more in the early years, which I always recommend because you get that compounding effect early on. You get a lot of revenue coming in to help stabilize your operational spending, and then you're not playing catch up quite as much in the later years. The next column over is the notes column, and I just wanted to emphasize that all the options end the fund balance in about the same place. So they're all roughly comparable. They all roughly leave the water utility with a little over $2 million at the end of the 5-year plan. So your current reserves are only about $1.2 million in cash, and so we are building up some additional fund balance. The fund balance is reasonable. We want to make sure that you have at least 6 months of operating costs in cash available. I wanted to make sure that you have at least 1 year of debt service payment available in cash on hand, and then major repairs and replacements. I want to make sure that your utility has some funding, some cash in the bank. If you have a major pipe break or pump blows out or what have you, that your utility has that money available without having to take out an emergency loan or something like that. So a little over $2 million was pretty reasonable given the And then I put a note at the bottom that even though we show percent increases here, this is the total amount of revenue that I'm proposing the utility collects, and not every customer will get the percentages increase to their bill shown here. So we are proposing some rate structure adjustments. So we're changing how we're charging, proposing to change how you're billing customers for water service. And so there will be some different impacts based on customer type and then amount of water use. Next slide, please. So in the presentation, I included several charts just to kind of give a visual representation of the cash flows. So I'll give a more detailed explanation for option 1, and then you'll be able to grasp more easily option 2 and 3. So on these charts, the bars are expenses. So each year we have operating expenses, which is in the blue, existing debt service, which is in the orange color of the bar, and then capital projects is the purple portion of the bar. And I'm comparing that to revenues, which is the green line. And so anytime that the bar, so expenses, are bigger than the line revenues, that means it's deficit spending. It means we're drawing on your fund balance, your water utility fund balance to pay costs. So we don't have enough revenues, so we're pulling on cash available to fund costs. And then the percentages shown there are the proposed rate revenue increases. And then you can see, so in this plan, fiscal year 25-26 is still a bit negative. Fiscal year 26-27 is about even, where revenues and expenses are about equal. And then the final 3 years of the rate plan, revenues are above expenses. We have net positive revenues, and we're building up the fund balance. And the cash fund balance is shown as the dotted black line. So you can see as revenues are increasing, that fund balance is also increasing to get to a little bit over $2 million for a healthy fund balance for option 1. We go to option 2. Thank you. So option 2, it just phases in the rate adjustments more gradually. So that first year rate adjustment is a little bit lower. We're drawing on the fund balance a bit more, and then building it up to a greater degree, and then building it up, in the last 3 years of the rate plan. Next slide, please. And then option 3 was the debt option. So the first year is a proposed 10% revenue increase. The second year was a 16% revenue increase, but then also had a potential debt issuance of $2 million loan. So we're getting a bunch of revenue that spikes up the fund balance, the dotted black line, and then we're spending it down on capital projects over time. However, that also adds new debt service costs. So the existing debt service cost is the yellow bar, and then the new debt service is that orange bar. So we're adding some ongoing costs. And remember that debt service, I assumed it'd be a 20-year loan. And so that'll continue on. You have to pay that every single year. It'd be a long-term obligation that the water fund would have to cover. And so that loan option is not really the recommended option at this phase. Next slide, please. Okay. So the rate study has kind of two tracks that we think about. The first track was the cost of service. So that's running a cash flow, thinking about the total amount of water rate revenues we need to collect to cover costs. And then the second track of the rate study is rate design. So how do we fairly and proportionally recover costs from customers based on how they take service? So that is required under Proposition 218. It is a legal requirement. And rate structure, rate design are the areas in California that become kind of litigious in the water utility business. So we want to be really careful with how we're proposing rate structure changes and what sorts of costs we're proposing to recover from different elements of the rate Currently, the city includes 11,000 gallons of water use in the base fee. So this rate proposal does phase that out and proposes to bill all water usage of volume rate. So every 1,000 gallons is billed under this rate plan. And the concept is that that's more fair to customers and more proportional to how they take service. So under the current rate plan, somebody who uses only like 2,000 gallons a month pays the same bill as someone who uses 10,000 gallons a month. And is that fair? I would say no. And then determining costs for the volume rate. So we have a base fee. We're proposing a base fee and a volume rate. For the volume rate, it's the same across all three options, and it is recovering utilities, maintenance, and a portion of staffing and engineering related to the delivery of water to customers. It's proposed to increase 4% annually, and then also reflects a little bit of water conservation. So I'm always nervous when we start adjusting the rates that how will people respond? What if people cut back from water use? So we've incorporated a little bit of conservation into our rate plan. For the base fees, we're proposing to have more differentiation between single family and commercial customers, where all customers are charged a fee based on meter size. This is kind of the gold standard in our industry for water service rate design. It's based on the American Water Works recommended method. So fees are scaled based on the maximum capacity of the water meter. So fees for 1-inch meters, 2-inch meters, and 4-inch meters are a different rate for those higher meters. And the idea is that the bigger meters cause the city to have to design and maintain its system to a greater degree to serve that huge amount of water capacity that customer can take. So your pumps have to be larger, your pipes have to be bigger, you have to be able to maintain that supply to that customer at all times at a bigger degree due to their large meter size. So in addition, the base meter fee is proposed to recover operating costs, so your fixed operating costs, your fixed debt service costs, and then capital costs and accumulation of reserves. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the option 1 rate impact that we've calculated so far. So on the left-hand side of the screen, that's the current rate structure. The current base fee is $32.25. That's applied to all customers, even your very large customers, and includes the first 11,000 gallons of water use per month. What we are proposing to do is have a 1-inch fee, up to 1-inch fee, a 2-inch fee, and a 4-inch fee. So all single-family residential customers would be in that 1-inch fee category. So under option 1, the base fee is proposed to be reduced very slightly in that first year and then ramp up, over time. And then the water usage fee is $1.23 for that first year per 1,000 gallons, and that is applied to all levels of use. So even that first 1,000 gallons is billed $1.23. There's no longer a base allotment included in the fixed charge. So you can see kind of on the left side of the screen, the current volume rates is a tiered rate plan where 11,000 to 22,000 gallons is 80 cents. The next tier above that is 95 cents, and then above that is $1.14. And then under the new plan, all levels of use are charged the $1.23 per 1,000 gallons. Next slide, please. So here are some example bill impacts under option 1. The top 2 rows is a low water user. That's like a winter bill amount. The middle section of the chart is an average user. So that's if we average all the months of the year, that it's about 16,000 gallons is the typical monthly use. And then a high user, that's really summer peak usage is about 22,000 gallons. So it is a range of impacts based on the water usage of the customer, where the higher water user is getting a higher percentage increase than the lower water user. Next slide, please. So this is option 2. Under option 2, the volume usage rate is the same, and we're adjusting the meter fees, the top portion of the chart, the fixed meter charges, a little differently for how we're phasing in that accumulation of reserves and capital funding, and how much we want to rely on fund balance in the beginning of the rate plan and then rebuilding it over time. That's the difference between option 1, 2, and 3. Next slide, please. So this option, it's kind of the same structure here, where we show a low bill, an average bill, and a high bill. And it's the same story where the higher users are getting different levels of bill impact based on their water use. Next slide, please. And this is option 3. The usage charge is the same, and then the meter rates are adjusted over time. Next slide, please. So this one also has a range of impacts, and is just phasing in the rate structure more gradually over time. And this was the option that had the debt service, the new debt issuance and the debt service being paid over time. Next slide, please. So here's an example chart. This compares the city of Kingsburg's current bill with the proposed rate options at 8,000 gallons of use. So this is the typical winter water usage. So currently Kingsburg is kind of maybe the lower third or so of surveyed agencies, and then even with the proposed rate increase, you don't change very much in the ranking of agencies. Next slide, please. And this chart is the current average bill. We look at average water use over 12 months of the year for a single-family typical bill. Kingsburg is among the lowest. Clovis always seems to have a very low bill. I don't know what their secret is there for keeping their water rates low, but they always seem to have a low rate. Your bill is very low, and then with the proposed rate increases to about nearly $50 or so under an average usage scenario, you're in the middle of the pack. There's a few there that are in the $40 to $50, $60 range. So that even though it's a percent, high percent increase, we are, as a reminder, we're playing catch up where you haven't raised your rates in a few years now, and with this increase, you are still very comparable with other local water utilities. So that's a very reasonable cost of service for your area. Next chart, please. And then this was a summer usage comparison, where your bill is actually the lowest when we look at kind of high summer usage, and then moves to the middle of the pack with that proposed rate increase. Next slide, please. Okay. So as a summary, this initial draft plan, we are available, to make changes, look at other options or scenarios, but for now, we are proposing that all water be billed. An alternative could be that instead of that fixed or that uniform rate, the one rate applied to all levels of use under the proposed plan, we could look at a tiered rate structure. So higher levels of use potentially could be tied to your PG&E bill, so your electricity costs to pump water at peak times. And then one other aspect of the rate study that I didn't include the charts for is drought rates. So under a water shortage emergency, the city could have a plan of drought rates on hand that you could implement only in emergency situations when needed. And the concept would be that those are cost of service based rates. They're not penalty fees, but they're cost of service based rates designed to make sure that the city continues to recover the revenue it needs to run the water system, even with declining water sales. We also, internally, we're kind of thinking about other potential fees or rate structures. One option could be implementing a series of meter charges, irrigation meter charges. So service connections where the water is used for indoor consumption has one set of rates, and then irrigation-only meter fees would pay a slightly lower rate. The idea there is when water utilities are designed, they're designed to meet maximum day demand, and then on top of that, we have to have fire protection available. So a huge amount of water has to be available for firefighting. And then irrigation customers don't have a structure to warrant a fire protection-related fee or charge, so they could maybe get a lower meter fee, but they would pay the same volume rate because they're using, for each unit of water that they're consuming. We also internally kind of thought about private fire service lines. So those would be service lines that are only tied to fire sprinklers. So they should never be used. They're kind of a standby service. But the city does incur some costs to just kind of inventory them, maybe do some flushing, inspection, those kinds of costs potentially could be wrapped into a private fire service line. However, my understanding is the city doesn't have a good inventory of the fire service lines, throughout your service area. So that one maybe would be a little tricky and difficult to administer. You also have inside versus outside city rates. Those were popular in prior, kind of back in the day, so to speak. Under Proposition 218, it's hard to determine a different cost for inside and outside rates. Can we identify specific increases in service costs for those outside city customers? Usually we can't, and so I recommend that all customers be charged the same amount. We no longer have that differentiation. Next, please. Okay. So where we are on schedule is we have some draft options. We can present those to City Council as an information-only presentation, get some initial feedback, as well as feedback tonight, and then write up the preferred option into our final report. That will be our administrative record under Proposition 218. And then the plan would be to conduct the noticing of the proposed increase to ratepayers in the spring. Tentatively, we have May 16th as the written objection deadline. That's the new administrative procedures law that went into effect. And then we wanted to give ourselves a little time in case anyone does file an objection. We have time for legal counsel to respond to it, to then have our Proposition 218 hearing in June, with the ultimate goal of having a July 1st implementation date. And that would be absent, of course, a majority protest at our Prop 218 hearing. And then July 1st is corresponding to the fiscal year cycle, so it's pretty convenient for budgeting. And the first rate increase would be reflected on the August bill. So the August bill showing July usage. On top of that, each year, City Council has the option to review the rate plan. Like I said, it's a legal maximum rate. So if financial conditions are better than what I assumed, you always have the option to adopt a lower rate than what we included in the Proposition 218 process. So you can always go lower, but you can't go above what we've included So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to talk about different options, any specific questions on the options, rate design questions or considerations. I'm happy to work through that with you.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation and committee discussion.
I have a question about the drought, the drought rate. If we looked into that, how does that declaration come? Is that a state declaration, or is that a council specific that makes that declaration that it's an emergency? Or is that however we line that out?
So typically what would happen is either the state or our local water division, so like our region would declare a drought and say, hey, you guys need to cut back. We would bring that forward to you, City Council, for approval to be able to pass those or implement those rates during that time.
Because I believe Fresno County has been in a state of drought disaster for 10 years. So
They
are we
did-
just automatically going to start there is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, so again, council would have the option to be the final say of, yeah, we're adopting these rates, so.
And the other option is, and Allison, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a non-Prop 218 process whereby the council could implement essentially penalty fees on top of the rates. So you could leave the rates as they are, and then, we did this in 2014, 2015, that if you used over a certain amount, there was an automatic, I think at the time it was like a $45 fee.
It's a bit hard to hear.
No.
Daniel, you were coming in, loud and clear. Others, I can't quite hear. Is there a microphone?
Alex was mentioning the ability to be able to implement some penalty fees outside of the Prop 218 process without going through there in case we needed to implement drought rates as a penalty.
Yep.
So I guess my first question with it is, for any of the options, with our ending balance of like 2.2 to 2.4, is that how much we need?
So I think what Allison mentioned was the ability to cover costs for at least 6 months, but also to have some money in reserves in case there's any issues. Major repairs, like I said, some of those don't always happen as planned, so we want to be able to have that flexibility to be able to initiate those repairs without impacting our system.
And that money would go into a water enterprise account, or where would that money go specifically? In holding?
Yeah, so our 318 fund right now is a water enterprise account. So all the fees that we collect right now stay there, and then our costs for maintaining the system, paying individual employees that are connected to putting on, or first of all, maintaining the water system, but then there's also a portion of some of our office staff who help with billing and things like that. Some of their salaries and wages are part of the enterprise fund. And we kind of did something similar. I guess to sort of answer the question, like as we monitor it, or regardless of what rate is chosen, or even if they're different from this, we implemented, or the council ultimately implemented I think it was up to a 10% increase each year for the solid waste rates, and we have implemented lower than that in each year. So we do monitor it, and then make a recommendation based upon, the CPI from Mid-Valley, but then also, what our fund balance is at based upon, other costs that we incur. So even if we start to, I think we've taken into consideration some of the utility fees and some of these other things in there, but if for some reason, those are lower than we've anticipated, then there's some room there based upon, our existing financial policies.
I don't need it now, but whenever this does go to council, we'll probably need to know what we have in that account to start with, to see how much we're adding to it. We don't need that number right now, but.
So we have the reserve. It's at about 1.2 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're wanting to double that, triple that.
Well, at the end of it, it'll go to 2.4.
So it'll go from 1.2 to 2.4, so we're realistically only adding 1.2 with these. We're not adding 2.4 additional,
Correct.
Yeah.
And I would say 1.2 is probably
the low end.
probably the lowest end of where we'd want to be currently. And then I think as we start to, I think there's a little bit of strategy, for the council to consider. We've talked about both with any of our rate studies about trying to stay on 5-year programs now, so we don't have to go through these, much larger increases, right? So even when we come back with solid waste in, 2 or 3 years, then hopefully it'll just be sort of consistent. But if there's a healthier fund balance, I think that the rates that you'll be considering in 5 years potentially will be not as intensive too, right? So it's a little bit of, choosing your hard either now or potentially later. And so
I guess my next question, sorry, I'm taking a lot of time. So the meter size, the 1-inch, 2-inch, 4-inch. You said, Allison, there's absolutely no single-family dwellings that have 1-inch pipes?
No.
Or 1-inch
No,
meters?
the majority of family residentials are 1 inch.
Well, there's a big difference between the majority and all of them, because I don't want to hit a single family with this these are substantial increases.
Yeah,
for
so
them.
there may be some that have an inch or inch and a half, depending on some of the property sizes. We do have some meters or some residences that still do not have meters, that we're working on determining the lot size and determining the volume of water that they're gonna need. And so there may be some that will require an inch or inch and a half. A 2-inch meter would definitely be overkill for any residential property.
So is the answer no?
The
That we
answer-
won't have any, I don't want somebody for some anomaly reason, with a single-family house to have a 2-inch meter.
Yeah, there should not be any single-family residence with a 2-inch meter.
So what kind of businesses are we talking about with a 4-inch meter?
Industrials,
Like
commercial
very
buildings,
large industrials?
maybe Aslan Packing, maybe T-Mobile has a 4-inch.
So the 2 inches for slightly larger?
Yeah.
Okay. Apartments?
So one of the things that, if you look into the study a little bit deeper, when we did do the meter project, the multifamily apartment complexes were not metered as part of that process. So we do need to come up with a program to get all of those multifamily units metered. Most likely 1.5 to 2 inches, depending on how many units they have.
So for the apartments, how will that rate work for the people that are living in those apartments? Do we just charge the apartment complex, or do we charge the individual renters?
I think it just depends on the unit structure and how it's managed. You can have each unit be individually metered with the 1 inch, which I think would be super expensive to implement. Most likely, it's going to have one metered connection where that cost is spread out through all the units, and then they can determine how they want to bill that water usage.
So like 801 and 901 Herald, let's just take those larger. They'd probably require a 4-inch pipe, I assume, or a 4-inch
Yeah,
meter.
so they may just have one meter.
So how are we going to bill them?
They would get used per consumption. So
Is it going to be at the 4-inch rate?
it'd be, if that's the meter that's required for that location, it'd be the 4-inch rate plus the consumption.
Okay.
Currently, what's getting billed is they're getting billed a flat rate times the number of units. So there actually may be some savings, so.
Is there an option to bill apartments differently that would kind of make more sense? Because it seems like
You can bill
Flat
if you metered every single unit, or
that's not-
it just kind of becomes a little bit difficult. A lot of them have shut-offs at like every building, so where there's like 4 apartments or 8 apartments per building, it still gets a little bit difficult. Like if you have a vacancy and there's 1 meter going into, that building, then that cost is gonna get spread over 8 units, even though there may be only 6 occupant or 6 of the units occupied. So it just kind of depends.
So the way that we do it now is, let's just say there's a 10-unit apartment complex. They are getting charged 10 times the single-family rate. So they're getting charged, what is that, 32?
Right,
something
they're
I think
paying
it's a little higher. I think it's
$322.50.
What's that?
Like $322.50 is how much they pay now.
Right. That would be the case. So if you went to, you know, I mean, the meter size is going to be dependent upon what the use of the building is. So, you know, that's why a single-family property shouldn't have probably a 2-inch meter unless it's some massive property or something like that. But if it's an apartment complex, it may need something higher. But there could be the potential that they are using less water because it's an apartment complex than what we're actually charging them now from an equity standpoint. But that's kind of dependent upon what the individual apartments use. And how they get billed, we're probably only going to have one bill. It's going to be for the apartment complex or the apartment management firm, and then they're going to turn around and bill the individual, you know, residents. Because we can't, to Daniel's point,
Right, we can't do that. I get
it's pretty exhausting, or, you know, pretty difficult to meter every single unit. I mean, even in a brand new build. I mean, I think what'll probably end up happening, like we've been talking about internally, so, you know, 7 or 8 years ago when we had to retro install meters on all the residential properties that didn't have them, the city borrowed to purchase all the meters up front and to have them installed, but then build the property owners, you know, over time to pay that amount, right? And so I would suspect that we would probably bring something similar back from an apartment complex standpoint to say, you know, you have to pay for this, and then, you know, it becomes part of the shared cost of, because, you know, a water utility is not supposed to make money, you know, it's just supposed to pay for the cost of providing the service, or not like PG&E or somewhere where you have, you know, stockholders or things like that, they can have a profit margin.
So my last question is, we provide water services for the Tulare County Summerlin homes.
Correct.
How does this factor in with that?
So
Are we billing Tulare County and they're collecting it, or do we get that directly from them, and is that the exact same rates, or is that going to be a different rate?
I can answer that. So yeah, they're metered. They do get billed directly from us for water service and street sweeping. Because they're in Tulare County, they have a different solid waste provider. But we do bill them, and we do collect that money directly. So it doesn't go through Tulare County and come back to us.
Are the rates the same
They are the same.
for water?
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Yeah, I think just a couple more things that I just wanted to add. So I know Alex mentioned, and also the study also mentioned that the last increase was in 2019. Since 2019, our operations and maintenance for our water system is completely different. In 2019, there was no chlorination of the system. We had no GAC tanks. Since then, because of our size and number of connections that we have now, it requires chlorination. It requires chlorination because of our operations of our GAC tanks. And that has definitely contributed to the additional cost of operating the system. There's additional reporting that needs to happen. There's additional supplies that we need to purchase. Just normal day-to-day things that we've done, running the water model, identifying, faulty hydrants, checking the hydrants, checking the generator. So the operations has changed significantly. So, I mean, with all of those things comes an added cost. So it hasn't just been that, we're kind of lacking on the revenue side. I think the expenses of how the actual system is being run is a lot different than what it was in 2019.
And I mean, it's fair to say that Sigma has added a significant amount, to our requirements. So regardless of the situation that we're in, we know what our costs are for Sigma, with our existing process. But I think it was pretty well known that once that passed and there was going to be some requirements to build recharge, or regardless of the GSA that you're in, that you're probably going to see some increases in water rates. And I think if you look at some of those comparative charts in there of the other communities around us, you can see how they have increased their fees too. And they're, we get compared a lot to one of the communities that is not in our GSA, and they're, on the very high end. And so I don't know if that's specific to their Sigma costs or other things as well. But it's important to talk about it, because if that wasn't a thing in California, I would say we would be having a little different conversation, maybe still looking at rate increases, but not necessarily at this exact amount.
Okay, given that these are significant increases, are there any Do we have any avenues for people that are, I mean, this is a huge increase for people living on a limited income. So are there avenues for people that are struggling financially or not?
I think Allison can better answer the question about our legal ability to do
Offer any
that.
kind of discounts, Allison? The legality of,
Yeah, sure. I'm really having trouble hearing. Alex and Daniel, you're coming in pretty strong. Others are a little muted. I think the question was, are there any senior discounts that we can offer or low-income discounts? Is that the question?
yes.
Okay, so under Proposition 218, we cannot raise rates on one group of customers to provide a subsidy for other groups of customers. However, we can use non-rate revenues, so like penalties and delinquency fees, interest earnings, things like that. So those are other types of water revenues, water utility revenues that you do have, and let me pull up our charts here. So we estimated the city collecting about 90,000 of those costs, those revenues. So that revenue could be assigned to directly fund a low-income or senior discount program. Alternatively, the city could elect to allocate some amount of like general fund revenue to fund a low-income program. You just can't use general rate revenue for that.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
First of all, you know who I am. First of all, if I may ask Allison, have you ever been to Kingsburg? Hello? Hello?
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
That's a first.
Question?
Have you spent any time in Kingsburg?
I'm sorry. Maybe Daniel, you were coming in clear before. Are you closer to the computer or the mic? Would you mind repeating the question?
Oh, this? Oh, okay. Stupid. Have you spent much time in Kingsburg, Allison? Did you?
I mean, I did the solid waste rate study, so I came for multiple, visits for that. I don't live in Kingsburg.
Okay, but you're kind of local?
So I am in the Bay Area.
Okay.
I'm from the Central Valley, though. I grew up in San Joaquin County and certainly do a tremendous amount of business in Fresno County. I did the city of Kerman's water rates. I worked with the South Fork Kings Groundwater Sustainability Agency, McMillan, GSA, City of Hanford. I mean, certainly familiar with your area.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Those are my questions for you. My other comments, and there's a lot here, so I'm not sure I've got them scattered. First of all, back in, I think it was pre-COVID when the water, because we were in the drought, what was that, 2014, something about that, and then increased the rates. Whether you were on city council or not, I'm sure you remember all the controversy and so forth that issue caused. So that's something to consider. Also, what's unique about Kingsburg from any other community in the San Joaquin Valley is our front yards look good. They look nice. Even if they're not fancy, they look nice. Now, backyards may look like crap, but the front yards look nice. And many people take great pride in having a really nice looking front yard, whether it's flowers, whether it's grass, artificial, whatever. And one of my concerns is with rapidly increasing water rates, you're going to have the demise of the beautiful front yard, and that is part of the Kingsburg experience, the Kingsburg thing, that we want things neat and orderly, and we want it to look nice. Now, I realize that if you drive around town, a lot of people have put in artificial turf in the front yard. Again, we don't know what happens in the backyard, but we don't see it. So that saves. On one of my properties with this, it was 2014, I put artificial turf in front. I have all drought tolerance in front. The backyard, I still have grass because I had a dog at the time, but anyway. My other property, I'm redoing the landscaping to make it the backyard so that I will, when I get it done, I will be using a little bit of, not much water because I have artificial, and then I'm going to have drought tolerant. The front yard, when I get around to getting that done, same thing. But not everyone can do that. I still want it to look nice. So that's a concern. Stacy brought up a good thing about elderly or financially strapped people, whatever your terminology you use.
Sure.
And that's a real issue because we have a large elderly population in this town. Now, many of them, based on observation, they can afford a water bill. Some cannot. But they are living in the same house they've lived in for 40, 50, 60 years. For them to move someplace without grass or whatever, that would be more costly than staying in the house that's already paid for. So I'm rambling a bit because this whole water thing, I think you need to proceed with a lot of caution and clarity because, yeah. And then two, how are you going to combat, just put all these new homes? And now, I know a lot of those front yards are drought tolerant, or at least they look drought tolerant. They don't have grass, they've got plants and bark and whatever. Not all. But here, and you know the controversy about all these new homes going in because I've been at these meetings and heard people again and again saying no new homes, no growth. So it's kind of become a pickle here, so to speak, that you want to raise water rates. I understand part of the reasoning for it, but we also want to preserve Kingsburg, so it's the awesome-looking city that it has been, and we don't want trashy front yards. You can go to Selma and Dinuba to see that. But yet you got these new homes coming in, and then you want to raise the water rates. So I'm starting to ramble. I'm just, because I will put together some thoughts, but I'm just at this small group just bringing this up as a, be aware, and I'm sure you'll think about it. But these are some of the concerns off the top of my head that have me bothered. And the chlorination thing, Kingsburg used to have great water. The water now tastes horrible. It's absolutely disgusting. Not as bad as Hanford, but it's really bad. So, anyway.
Well, I have a question for you, Chris,
Yeah.
since you're up here.
Yes.
So you're talking about you want people to be able to keep their front yards like green and use water, but how do we pay for it if we don't charge more?
Well, I mean,
That's the quandary we're all in, and it's going to be getting that message out to
I
people.
think that, but you can, as a homeowner, you can do things to reduce the amount of water to water your lawns or your, you drip irrigation and put, as other plants die, you put dry, drought tolerant plants.
Sure, and we have programs to assist people in that specifically.
I can use one of those when I get time to look at it. But those are things, and I know a lot of people do it, and you drive around and you see the artificial turf in the front. Now, so it always looks nice. You see, the plants that to me look like they're drought tolerant. I'm not a professional plant person, but it, so I think there's many people who have gone to, I've been going to great lengths to reduce the water usage for landscaping, but I don't want to have
So which one of these options do you think best suits you and suits Kingsburg?
I don't know yet. I'm on the spot. I only saw.
So are we. You came up.
But you don't have to make a decision tonight. Right?
We make a recommendation.
Okay, so I have to look at these more carefully before I make a decision.
That's fair.
But I'm not necessarily pleased with any of them. So, but, and I think too, the part of how it's currently now that if someone goes over that, was it 11,000?
11,000.
They're charged extra, you know, that's fair. I mean, because there's been a few times as I've been redoing landscaping, you've got concrete and you're always having to hose it down. So this summer I did go over once because I was in the process and I had to hose down the concrete all the time. But I go to great lengths to reduce it, but I got someone down the street from me. I went for a walk at 10 o'clock the other night and he had just irrigated his front yard. And it's, was it February? It's February, and we just had some rain last week, and we're going to have some more rain. I've had my sprinklers turned off since November. So those people, you know, and I know they can get their, you know, but they have to be turned in, I guess, or whatever. Or Dana can sleep. Dana can sleep in his car overnight or something.
I look forward to you coming back. Once you've had time to digest it, you see where we're at. It's a tough.
It is tough.
It's tough because we have to pay for it, and there's no money to pay for it if we don't charge people more.
The other thing I have, I can't remember what it's called, that thing a couple years ago that the city of Kingsburg didn't go with, it's some alphabet soup name, but they went with whatever for water. I can't remember. I have to look at my phone for notes on that. But, you know, was that a wise choice to do that? I don't know. I don't have the answer. And that was what, 3 years ago, 4 years ago? I don't know. Anyway, so it's a pickle, but I just, you know, I don't want Kingsburg to start looking trashy in the front yards. Again, they can do what they want backyards. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Any more committee discussion?
To Chris's comment about, and your comment, Stacy, about low income or senior discounts, what does the process look like? Would we look at that as part of the budget, or are there legal procedural requirements that we would have to follow for Prop 218? Could you just expand a little bit on that?
To be honest, I think it'd be a little difficult to implement. We do offer, like, for example, in solid waste, we have a 64-gallon container. And literally it's $1 less when you look at the fixed cost of providing the service. I mean, it is a smaller can, but it's the same truck that's picking it up. It's, you know, cost, whether I'm picking up a 96-gallon or I'm picking up a 64-gallon, doesn't really change the fixed cost very much. The tipping fees might be a little different at the end of the day, but I mean, it's very minimal. With water, it becomes, I think, a little bit more challenging because the cost of water, the fixed cost of water, doesn't differentiate whether you're fixed income or a higher income. Is it impossible? No, but I think that rate design would be one that we would need to work on and determine what that dollar amount would be, what that threshold's going to be, and it would be something that we would require I think the finance committee's feedback on.
Yeah, I think the challenge there would be like how we would set up that program. So, I mean, you could set it up at age-based, right? But age-based doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have the ability to pay. So then is it income-based? And then I guess we would just have to figure out what's a reasonable burden for us to determine that, right?
How much staff time would that take?
Right. Which is, maybe it's just, you know, hey, this is what I make, and then you take that person at their word, and then you're offering them a credit, you know, each month, you know, based upon the available budget, you know, from what Allison talked about, using sort of, you know, the $90,000 budget, if or some amount with up to that amount, because you can't subsidize it, right? You're using different amounts. So I think that would be the discussion that this group would have to have. And, you know, we talked about it, and I would, you know, just say, I mean, Daniel and myself and Dave Peters were, you know, this is maybe the third version of different rates, right? So one of the versions was probably much higher than this because it involved higher capital improvement projects. And we said, what's really necessary within the next 5-year range? How can we, sort of sharpen our pencil a little bit on that to make sure that we're doing, what's absolutely necessary. I certainly understand the point about new homes. I think you could argue that new homes help share some of the costs. So as long as we're not adding a bunch of staff, staff time, we haven't added a new well in several years, different things like that. They can be sharing the costs and the revenue. So it's a challenge because I think, like everything else that we all deal with, costs have gone up and utility costs have gone up, and we have to continue to provide the service, without, if you don't, right, if there's not some sort of change, we end up in the same spot that we were with the solid waste, where it's being subsidized by another fund, which is usually general fund, and then something has to give from the general fund, and that's being taken, from the taxpayers, just the same, right? So I think, using a system like this is more equitable, because if you use more, then you're going to pay more. And, if it's wintertime and you shut your sprinkler system off and you only use 3,000 or 4,000 gallons inside, then you're going to pay less than the person who uses, 9,000 or 10,000 gallons.
I think this rate, or the option one, or literally all of them, because they all kind of provide a per use cost to it. I think it really allows the homeowner or whoever's using the water to really focus on what their usage is. If you're like to wash your driveway down every week, it's something that you're going to notice in your bill. If you're a swimming pool owner and you like to drain and fill your pool every summer, it's something you're going to notice, where in the current structure, there's a little bit more wiggle room for them to use their allotment of water in that base rate. So, like I said, I think there's definitely opportunities and a little bit of a clearer way for you to notice when you're using more water. I mean, I think one of the difficult things that we also face as a department is that we bill in arrears. So the waters that you use, for example, we get into September, you're getting your bill for water used in August. And I mean, it happens, as you kind of move along, where you're in November and you're like, I turned my water system off a long time ago. Why am I still getting this bill? And then you don't see it until, your December bill. And kind of subsequent thing happens, like, hey, I turned my sprinklers on and, I'm still paying $32 and some change. What's happening? And it's literally because we bill in arrears. And I mean, that's the only way that we can, I think, accurately reflect the use that people are actually using. I mean, I think it'd be a little difficult for us to kind of estimate what you're using and bill ahead. So, like I said, definitely some challenges. I think they'll continue when we do this rate structure, but it'll allow people to kind of reflect a little bit more on how they're using their water every day.
Okay. Any other committee comments? So this is just
Either
looking
seeking
for direction.
Well, if there was, I think the thought tonight was, if there was additional information that this committee wanted to review prior to it going to council, that's what we want to hear tonight. If we're comfortable, at least at this stage, whether there's a particular option or not, I'm not overly concerned about, I guess. I mean, I would say from a staff's perspective, if you just look at the rates, I think, again, it becomes a little bit of strategy on what you want for sort of in year one versus at the end of it, because option one, your rates aren't going to be as high at the end of it, and the fund balance is higher. So I think I viewed that long term as the more palatable option, but then it does have a bigger increase up front. But if you go back to, I guess, just looking at a general time frame, thought was to bring an informational item to council next week, get any feedback from the council, to see if they had thoughts. That still gives us potentially the option for them to give some feedback so that we could come back to the first meeting in March if need be. If not, then the final meeting in March is when the Allison would present the final report to City Council, and then we kind of start falling into that, Prop 218 timeframe, and hopefully are on track for implementing something, whatever that option is, as part of the fiscal year, so we can incorporate it with our budget.
So you don't need us to, you want to present all three options to council, correct? And then get their initial digestion?
If there's no change from tonight, then we would present the same thing. If this group, says, of these three, our preference is one of them, we could include that as part of the discussion next week. But our thought would be yes, to essentially represent, this similar report.
Let's say present all three. My personal preference is option one, just because the cumulative increase is less, 6 to 19%. I mean, substantial less, but that's just mine. I think they should all go to council to review. That'll give us more time to kind of digest it now this information's out there for everybody too. Everyone's going to be mad that their rates are increasing, and I get that. I think we just need to be reasonable with our decision with that. I think the more time council has it after it's presented to make a decision, the better.
I personally would get rid of option 3. I wouldn't want to move forward with any kind of debt financing, but no, I would lean more towards option 1 for the same reasons, but yeah, I would agree, and you can present them all, but I don't think the debt financing would be a good idea, but yeah. Okay.
That's enough direction for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison, if you can hear us.
They said thank you.
Thank you, Allison. We're all set.
Great. Again, the sound is a little rough.
We lost you, Allison.
Okay, moving on to item number 3 is the fiscal year 25-26 budget schedule. Presentation by member Alexander Henderson.
Yes, Chairman Smith, members of the committee. This is just an annual item that we bring to the Finance Committee and then also into the City Council that helps lay out sort of some key dates as we establish our upcoming budget. If my recommendation this evening is to make recommendation to the council to approve it. There is one change. There is an error. It says May 2024. The bottom of the first page should say May 2025. But other than that, all the dates are accurate. So happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Committee discussion. Okay. Any public comment on this item? Nope. Okay. Then I'll bring it back and to the committee and are you looking from your okay and entertain a motion?
Motion to move forward with those dates.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And that is it for our regular business. Is there any other business for the Finance Committee? Seeing none, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you for joining us.